Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about a B2B sports magazine that made a big bet on live events and transformed itself into a thriving media company. When Nick Meacham first joined SportsPro in 2010, it mainly existed as a B2B print magazine that monetized through advertising. The editorial staff was tiny, and it didn't have much of a web presence. But after taking over the business operations, he rapidly expanded it into new ventures. First by launching a series of lucrative conferences that targeted multiple industries within pro sports, and then by rapidly building out its digital operations. In an interview, Nick explained to me why he made such a big bet on events, how the company adapted during the pandemic shutdown, and where he sees more opportunities to monetize the outlet's digital content, including his plans to launch a subscription paywall. Before we jump into the discussion, I want to talk about this episode's sponsor, Video Husky. If you're like many video creators, editing is your least favorite part of the creative process. That's because it's usually the most time-consuming part. You're probably spending countless hours scrubbing through a massive backlog of footage, monotonously piecing them together in post-production. Or you're paying an exorbitant amount of money to a video production agency in exchange for subpar work. So think about this. What would it mean if you could get back those hours spent editing your own videos? Video Husky has created a very streamlined, cost-efficient method for editing video. By hiring Video Husky, you're not just getting a video editor, you're also getting a project manager who oversees the entire workflow of your editing requests, access to a project management dashboard where you can communicate with your editing team and monitor the status of your edits, vast libraries of licensed stock footage, music, and motion graphic assets to spice up your videos, and a proven, systematic process of editing videos that's worked for hundreds of creators. Video Husky will also conduct a free consultation over Zoom with you that will help assess your needs and recommend the best editing package for you. Go sign up for your free video editing consultation at videohusky.com. That's videohusky.com. I'll leave a link in the show's description. Okay, on to my interview with Nick. Hey Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be with you, and really good to connect. I've really been enjoying all the great content you've been producing over the last 12 months plus.
Thank you. So you run a media outlet that covers the business of sports. How did you get started working in sports media?
Sure. Well, originally I studied business and sports management through university and did a degree in business, and then moved pretty quickly into and this is in Australia, if you didn't pick up on the accent. But studied there and then moved pretty quickly into working in the sports space, working in live events, both competitive and corporate in Australia. And did a few years there, and then sort of found an opportunity that popped up in the sort of newspaper game with News Limited or News Corp, basically Murdoch's News Limited business out in Australia, and worked in the newspaper business for a couple of years in the advertising side of things, and enjoyed working in the media, but wanted to look at opportunities, and see what life was like in other places, and ended up finding myself in London, about 13 plus years ago now. Basically found a job in the B2B media space, which coming over from Australia, I found actually really hard just to get a start. But once I got a start, which was in a B2B trade publisher, a very small business, I got approached by the guys at SportsPro Media about the opportunity to join the business, and it was a trade publisher with around sports, so both sports and media coming together, and it seemed like a really nice fit for me. And I took the chance to get involved then, and that was about 13 years ago, or 12 years ago now, and have been involved ever since.
So you were in kind of like you were actually in the sports business, like when you were in Australia. Then you moved over to media, but not necessarily selling advertising for sports in particular. Like no. You were selling ads for the entire newspaper or whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was focused on, I was actually focused in the real estate sector, which was a huge growth area in Australia at the time. I worked for a newspaper that was doing around $1 million in revenue every week in advertising, which for a regional newspaper is pretty extraordinary numbers. But that was the scale of the real estate market back then. So yeah, found myself in advertising there, working with both on new biz and account management stuff. But then found myself sort of expanding when I came over to the UK and falling into the B2B space.
And so you get this job at SportsPro. What was its history before you started there?
Yeah, the business was, I think, around 12 months old, so pretty early stages. And it had been just acquired by, so pretty early on, acquired by a small media business called Henley Media Group. And then it was basically effectively a magazine publisher. I think it was probably 10 editions in, so about a year in. It was a monthly magazine at the time. And I joined, and the product looked good. Obviously, digital was a part of the business, but not a priority. But it was really about producing a really premium publication built around, talking to and being for leading executives in the industry. So the publication would be basically providing insights around what a CEO or commissioner or managing director or whatever the role might be, how do they run their organization in the sports space? And that could be everything from a sports team or a league through to data and technology businesses, broadcasters, all that sort of thing. It was really focused on the people in the industry at the time.
And it was like one of those things where the marketing team would just like buy a list of sports executives and mail a free copy to their office addressed to them.
Yeah, there was a subscription part of the business, but a lot of it was what's the term? Basically, comp circulation, and originally to get things up and running. So there was a subs business. It was early stages when I joined, but the main revenue stream for that business at the time was advertising, basically targeting those C-level execs, and that was mainly on the comp side, with a strong list of people right across the world. It wasn't a UK focused publication. It was very much a global one, where from the US to UK, Europe, Australia, Asia, pretty much everywhere that it was focused on.
And what was your job? What was your first job working for them?
Yeah, it was just working on the sales side, so partnerships, sponsorships, and advertising sales. And hadn't really worked too much on the B2B side at the time, but focused on basically reaching out. And the sell back then was really, you could obviously look at the longer term stuff because it was a pretty early stage publication. The main sell was, hey, we're selling basically off the features we had in the magazine. So if we had a report on stadias, we would then basically reach out to stadium providers who might be everything from architects to technology businesses, and just basically sell off the back of that and try and get them to buy a space alongside these features or reports. A hard slog, I would say. Basically, you had to do a lot of work to get a lot of stuff out there and get a lot of rejections pretty early on. It was at a stage where the digital advertising was becoming a much more prominent piece of the marketing budget, and print was sort of hitting a bit of a wall at the time. So it was quite a hard sell to get into. The benefit that I had going in was that I knew the sports space pretty well because I'd studied it, I'd worked in it, and that gave me a really good understanding of the why. Like, why would a company want to get involved and be alongside some of this stuff? What would the story be that they would want to tell, even if it's just an advertisement? Like, what are they trying to say, and who are they trying to talk to? And I could understand the angle, because you needed that when you were targeting businesses. In B2B, going back a decade, B2B weren't spending money heavily in the marketing space, and they definitely weren't spending it on advertising. So then you had to sell them the concept of advertising in the first place, let alone whether or not you could access some of their budget. So it was it was a difficult sell, but one that if you were smart about it, you could get some really interesting companies involved. And so clients would range from major broadcasters to tourism bodies to technology companies to law firms. It would be quite a varied mix of businesses.
And you moved up within the company pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. I hit the ground running pretty well. I did well on the sales side, but I think also because I had a bit of a background in the space, I had a lot to sort of bring to the table with regards to ideas on how we could grow the publication, and sort of moved into a commercial director role within 18 months or so, I think it was, or even less, and then took over running the company about a year later. So went from coming in at sort of the entry level to running the company in a couple of years' time, and was really fortunate that the ownership group were willing to back me to do so. I would also say at the time when we came in, it was a pretty mixed bag of people at the time. We had a great editorial team, but they were turning over salespeople at an incredible rate because it was such a hard sell. So I think because I was pretty good at selling at the time and getting an understanding of the angles of what we could do. They valued that, and I got a chance to sort of prove myself by taking over the company pretty quickly.
And especially as those first few years, it was a very print forward publication, right?
Yeah. So it was a monthly magazine that we published. And that magazine still publishes now, although it's now a quarterly magazine, a mix of digital at the time, but that was really it. So there was not a lot of diversification in the monetization streams of the business. It was really built exclusively on that advertising sell. And so one of the things that I'd basically gone to the board at the time was, hey, we need to diversify this business if we want to make it work. And those areas can range from subscription, obviously it's a growth area possibility, but really we thought, or I thought there was a gap in the event space in the market, that we have this audience that are engaged with us, whether it's through print or digital, that we can sell to directly for this type of thing. And so that was at the point where I think that's one of the reasons they bought into sort of the direction was, let's go all in on events. And that was about nine or so years ago. And that really helped to sort of, I guess, find the spark we needed to get the business moving in the right direction. Because at that time, when I took over, we were losing money at the time. It wasn't a sustainable business model in that way. So yeah, it took a fair bit of re-engineering by bringing the events in as a key part of the business to help turn that around to make it something that is, I guess, had a future, in putting it bluntly.
And you launch 3 major events, annual events?
In the first year, we launched 3 different conferences, and we then added the next year, another 1 or 2 after that. So today, for context, we had, in a non-pandemic year, we had 9 different conferences ranging between invite-only 50-person to 850, 900 people conference, 9 events in 5 countries, in Spain, Singapore, USA, the UK, and Switzerland. So, but at the time, we sort of went into it pretty quickly because we felt like we needed to. And those events were targeted. We weren't going for the big trade shows. We thought there was a bit of an opportunity in that more intimate, sort of small to medium size, few hundred people, targeted in specific niche sectors. And that's really where we focused our time on. And what I was most surprised about, because I'd worked in both sectors, but not something that was connected between the two, is how much support we'd get immediately from the industry, from senior people in the industry who were like, yeah, I'd love to be involved with your event straight away. Many events typically take a few years to get the credibility up to attract really top level names. And we got some of the biggest names in the industry coming over to our event right from day one. And I think it's just because we had a great media product that people were buying into. We just hadn't found a way to make it build a sustainable business around that product.
And so you did the events where you monetized through selling high price tickets like $1,000, and then also extremely high price sponsorships.
Yeah, absolutely. So rather than going for just mass numbers through the door and trying to build trade shows, which also as a business model has a lot of risk behind it, what we went through is more of a sustainable model where target price was around $1,000, give or take, depending on the size of the event. Those events at the time are ranging between that 200 to 700 person number, and sponsorship around it. So a pretty simplified model, fairly transactional at those times. Now we have a bit more of a sort of a collective sell where we are looking at more, I guess, of a a package sell opportunity in terms of bringing in the media and the event stuff all together, which is more attractive to clients than just looking at a one-off event these days. But that was the sell at the time, yeah.
And I think 5 years or so, you saw a lot of these like media / events companies kind of either sell off or just neglect their media arms because the events were where the money was. And now that's kind of viewed as being a mistake, especially once the pandemic hit and they needed that kind of media reach in order to kind of pivot and stuff. What was kind of your view on the media side as your event side was booming in terms of like what to invest in it and different things like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's a pretty big topic that you hear a lot of people talk about on reflection, and typically they do make the wrong move there. Where look on paper, it was pretty easy to make a case looking at a P&L that the editorial media part of the business wasn't making enough revenue based on the investment we were making, and the events were growing and growing at a pretty rapid rate. But we've always been quite bullish on the fact that we've got a good editorial product. We are generating good eyeballs and good numbers to the content we're producing, particularly through digital. And we have great support from senior people. There's something there. Because we're a small business, though, we couldn't really put all our eggs in both baskets in terms of both focusing on growing the media business and growing the events. So we had to sort of justify really that we had a business to grow. And so a lot of my time in particular was focused on growing the events business. So looking at how we could develop that. But with the media side, what we tried to make sure is we didn't start cutting costs on that side. We didn't start cutting personnel. We actually tried to keep at least the status quo or build alongside of that with a view that, hey, we continue to create a great audience and great community that we could feed into the events. And also create bigger opportunities to commercialize. At the early stages, though, that was hard to justify, but we believed that was going to be the case. And I'd say really the last couple of years, I'd say within the pandemic here, we were confident that we could get through that because we had such a strong audience connected with us through our digital means that even though we lost the physical events piece, we could still turn that digital audience we developed over the last plus decade, turn that into something pretty awesome through our digital events. And that really did work out for us.
So in terms of web content, eventually it sounds like you kind of, even though you still do a print quarterly, you did start publishing more content that was exclusive to the web, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for context, we produce about 2,500 news stories a year. 220, 250 features, original features, thought leaders. We're doing something like 150 there. So nearly 3,000 pieces of content, mainly for the digital side, plus podcasts and plus the quarterly magazine. So a lot of content. We have about a team of about, what's the number? About 11 in our editorial team currently. So we're making a fairly decent investment into the output on that side. And so for us, in terms of as a priority, the business is about 35 employees, so it's about a third of the team is dedicated to the editorial part of the business.
And how do you think about content output in terms of whether you're focusing on breaking news or analysis or writing profiles or long form features? How do you kind of approach assigning stories?
Yeah, so we made a decision sort of pretty early on that we wanted to be more about the insights side than the breaking news side of things. And that's just because we wanted to have as a purpose for the business that we would be the ones helping transform the industry, ones leading the digital transformation of the sports world, because it's undergoing a huge transformation as we're seeing in a lot of other sectors. But news doesn't take you that far. It just keeps you up to date. It doesn't help you do your job better. And that was kind of our philosophy, is how do we help people do their job better if they work in the sports industry? So features, insights, long form content, the events as well. Content is at the heart of all of those things. So those events and conferences we're running, the majority of people come to our events because they want to learn. Obviously, networking is part of it, but actually the data tells us that the content is the most important part. So yeah, that's always been a priority, but even more so, we've doubled down on that really as things like podcasts and audio has been a growing area. We've invested in bringing in resource and personnel onto that just to build that part of the business up as well.
What's your most effective marketing channels for your content? Like, I'm guessing Facebook isn't a huge traffic driver for you.
Yeah, a lot of it comes through Google still. Like, we're generating about 400,000 users a month on the website, and of that, well over half is from Google. So through search. Social media does a good job for us. LinkedIn and Twitter do a good job in driving people to the site, but newsletter numbers and search are by far our leading two channels for the website. So we do prioritize that. So that's been fairly organic. Like, what we've been quite surprised is, like, we haven't invested a load of time and effort into SEO to make search such a key part of growing our audience numbers. We have put some time into it, but not as a huge investment and priority. But it seems to be one that does generate a lot of audience numbers for us.
And with the newsletters, are you creating like editorial newsletters where you have writers who are trying to do analysis within the newsletter itself, or are you just kind of using those to drive traffic back to the website?
Yeah, so we have a daily news service, which is effectively, like you described, a call to action style newsletter that's driving people to the stories from the day before. And then we have dedicated editorial newsletters that are written by our senior editorial team in different sectors. So in streaming and OTT, we have in sponsorship and marketing as well, and also in motorsport, which is a big area for us. And they're doing a periodic one, so it's normally fortnightly, and they're more longer form on a particular topic, a bit more, I guess, in that Substack mold you kind of see now with the longer form than the call to action style.
And with the podcasts, are those kind of just like long form interview podcasts?
Yeah, so we're doing a mixed bag. So we have 3 different podcast, or what do you call them, titles or brands. So we produce about 3 or 4 podcasts a week. And those are mixing between a bit more of a current affairs look at what's going on through our editorial team. And then there's 2 others that are more interview led. So we'll be focused around an interview with one major person in the specific sector. So we have one that's built around the streaming and digital side. So we'll talk to people that range from the broadcast world. So we'll talk to people like Discovery and Warner Media and those types of guys, or we'll talk to rights holders like the Premier League or the Bundesliga and talk to them about their digital strategies as well, which is really cool, because when you start talking to these companies about that stuff, it's actually a lot of the challenges sports properties are facing are what the media world's facing too, in terms of monetization of content. And so it actually helps in many ways for us to be talking about some of the stuff that we're actually able to put into practice as a business.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk a little bit more about sports media in general in a few minutes. But so it seems like most of the content you're producing is free. Are you focused on digital subscriptions at all?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to it earlier, but basically the last few years, we've been focused on building this events business up to a point where it really gave us, I guess, we were comfortable that the business was sustainable and heading in the right direction. And so now, particularly from my perspective, much more of the time is being focused around what we do with our digital media business. So over those years that we were growing the events business, most of the effort and most of the energy commercially was focused on our events side, partially because that's where the opportunity was for our commercial team. That was in simple terms, the best way and the easiest way for us to generate revenue. But now what we're doing is we're kind of recalibrating that balance. So the digital side of our business, the media side, is becoming a much more important part of our revenue streams for the business. So initially, through those first few years, it was generating a little bit of revenue, but it was also just a key marketing channel for us to generate audiences and delegates for our events. Now it's becoming a really key monetization driver. So subscription is an area we're looking to launch this year. We've basically got a digital product for our magazine, but basically we're in the midst of finalizing development on a new digital product, a new subscription product, which will be launching hopefully at the latest halfway through the year. And that hope, we're looking to basically use that as we intentionally didn't spend time doing a half-hearted job on our subscription business over the last few years with the view that keep building audience, keep building a community, and when we're ready, launch a subscription product, and hopefully the appetite will be there and we can hit the ground running pretty quickly. And that's kind of the model we're going down. Advertising revenue, we're also haven't been strong on programmatic, but we're looking to launch a programmatic in the next month or so with the website to generate more advertising revenue other than the ad hoc sales that are coming in from our commercial team. And then editorial advertising deals will keep coming in through the wider commercial team as well.
A lot of publishers, when they launch a subscription product, they go one or two routes. They say, we're going to take what we're already publishing and just put some of it behind a paywall, either through a meter or just putting hard paywall on some of the articles, or some they do an additive approach where everything they do currently is going to stay free, but now they're going to produce something extra, like some kind of special newsletter or data product or something like that. And we're going to hire additional people to kind of staff that product. What's your thinking there?
Yeah, we're looking to add new product. And so some of that could be ranging from editorial output, but also looking at some sort of productifying, creating new products for the site. So we're looking at things like commercial tools effectively for our audience that can help them do, again, that sort of line I talked about, helping people do their job better. So what can we do with the content we're already producing? Can we create new products that help people search better, help people access to databases and access to insights and analysis that can help people with their day-to-day. So we're looking at more product being added to the business and to the platform rather than just sort of throwing a paywall on top of our existing editorial content. So generally everything will be still open access. We're still analyzing this. We might do a sort of a registration, single sign-on paywall at a certain level, just to start capturing first-party data for some of those people that are coming to the site. We won't charge. I don't think we'll be charging for, say, news access at all, particularly because we're not out there breaking a lot of exclusive news. We're more just sort of keeping on top of the latest news that happens across the industry, but we're not breaking. So I'd say that's really the focus, is building new product, making people's lives a little bit easier somehow through a platform that helps them do their jobs better.
So with the pandemic, I'm guessing that you took your physical events and you then started having regular webinars that were, if I had to guess, based on interviewing a lot of other people in this space, were free, but did lead generation where you turned over email addresses to sponsors. How much am I guessing correctly there?
You're pretty close. Not far off at all, actually.
So that was the approach, basically?
Yeah, sort of. So I'd say we had a bit of a mixed bag of different scenarios there. But initially, when everything was happening, we have these events that we were running of mid-size events. And what we decided to do is, firstly, turn all those events to virtual. Well, that's fine. That's not too crazy. But what we went for is we changed the model to your point, basically from like the $1,000 plus ticket to attend to free to access, at least the content with a premium offering available to people if they want to access on demand or access the networking and so forth. But what the benefit for us really was, we went from a model where, okay, we're attracting either 3, 4, 5, 600 people to an event. Well, this way, because we had this huge audience digitally, what we realized, we weren't actually giving our audience access to anything unique other than what's on our website. So we generated thousands of people coming to our online events, again, just through our own channels primarily. But the business model basically was, we effectively charge the same for sponsorship and sponsored content opportunities for our events that we would do for in-person as we did digitally, because they saw that most people bought into the value of the access to the data. And we obviously, being a European-based business or UK-based business, we obviously have to make sure we follow GDPR compliancy as well. So that's something that just adds a bit of a complexity to the mix. But We had, so all of our clients that we had on board at the time, we obviously had a number of events about to happen. We kept over 90% of our revenue and executed it on our virtual events. So turn those physical events revenues into virtual pretty much off the bat. So it worked out really, really well for us in the sense that we were able to keep a lot of those revenues and generate new revenue without the costs of delivering the physical events, which actually ended up meaning we had one of our best years ever, if not the best year ever, through the first year of the pandemic.
And have you started to reintroduce physical events again?
Yeah, so we had our first one in November back in London, and our next one's going to be in New York actually in March. But yeah, we're having to stay on our toes a little bit as things play out with the pandemic. We had an event due in February for the motorsport industry that we decided to push back a few months to give ourselves a bit of breathing room because we're just getting too uncertain with timing. But I always said to the team and the board at the time is I'm more concerned about the second year of this than I am the first year, because it was so clear cut on what we needed to do. But now we're in this world of uncertainty where, okay, are we doing it physical? Are we doing it virtual? What scale are we delivering it? Is it 80% of last time? Is it 100%? Is it going to be more? There's a lot of question marks around the scale of everything we're doing now from the event space. So actually, last year was a lot easier to manage than it is this year, where we're still living in quite a bit of uncertainty. But also, I would add, for the first year, we rolled out a new, again, an online event series, and we launched as quickly as we could because we saw everyone across the industry, a lot of our competitors as well, basically either furloughing staff or going into hibernation. And what we decided to do is actually do the opposite. We wanted to ramp up. So within a couple of weeks, we launched our first virtual event, generating a few thousand people to it. And we did that every 2 or 3 weeks, averaging over 1,000 people attending it right through the first few months of the pandemic. And that was huge for us because we generated a lot of revenue pretty quickly off the back of that, as well as we were able to convert a lot of those partners into make sure we were able to deliver on those commercial deals we had in place as well.
So let's talk a little bit about like what's going on in sports media right now, because it seems like it's experiencing a boom. You got, several acquisitions, you got major partnerships, you got a lot of people hiring. Do you feel like it's a legitimate boom, or do you feel like we're kind of entering a bubble?
Yeah, it's a weird time in the sports media landscape. It depends on what lens you're looking at. If you're looking at it from a broadcast perspective, or you're looking at it, say, from all the traditional media. Obviously, we've just seen the Athletic deal being announced with New York Times acquiring them from a traditional media side of things, which is obviously an interesting deal at that $550 million reported cash deal for them. But the boom, particularly in the US market, is largely driven on the fact that there's an expectation that betting is going to play an incredible role.
Right, because what was the Supreme Court? They ruled that sports betting could be made legal in any state, right?
Yeah, so that they've rolled that out in the US, and I think I'm not sure how many states it's rolled out to now, but I think it's about 12 off the top of my head. And they've just rolled out, I think it's this weekend, that you can now bet online in New York, and they're expecting that to be just the next wave of revenue generation for everyone. So it has such a cascading effect with betting. It the betting companies obviously make a lot of money, but so do the broadcasters. We've seen FanDuel sign a $25 million a year deal to sponsor the YouTube and podcast show of the Pat McAfee show. This incredible money coming from the betting sector because they're all fighting for market share in a completely new marketplace, which is only going to grow exponentially over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you think it's still only early stages, the money is incredible there, but that's going to be flowing through the leagues, throwing into the teams. So everyone in the sports space, particularly in the US, is buoyed by this sort of betting impact. UK and Europe and other markets are in a different position because they've had betting in place for decades. And actually what we're seeing in the UK and Europe is that they're putting restrictions in place on betting sponsorships because of what's seen as the negative impact betting has on people. So you don't have the upside that you're seeing you don't have the upside you're seeing in the US in other markets, particularly around the betting space.
And a lot of these, these deals involve lead gen, where someone reads an article on media site X and then clicks through to a sports betting site and makes a bet, and then they either get some kind of flat fee to the media site gets some kind of flat fee for that lead gen, or maybe they get a piece of the cut of whatever the revenue is. But there's this risk I think some people are worrying about, is that these betting sites, like, they're going to realize it'd be much cheaper just to skip out on the middleman and either acquire media companies or just start their own from scratch. Do you think that's threatening maybe the sports media market?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a few moves like that already. The biggest one is the Penn National Gaming, who acquired Barstool Sports. Mm-hmm. And Barstool has taken the industry by storm, and I think it's one of the biggest podcast publishers. They're huge on all their platforms, launching merchandise and e-commerce, and are owned by a pretty significant betting business because they want to own that relationship. First-party data is everything in any media industry, and it certainly is in the sports and betting world. And if you can own that relationship, you can do a lot more with it than if you're paying affiliate fees to different media businesses. So we've even seen betting businesses acquire even some sports teams and leagues. And sorry, not teams, but an example of this is Bally Sports, who are the naming rights owner of, I think they've taken the naming rights of the Sinclair regional networks. They've bought the AVP, which is the volleyball league in the US, and no one really knows what they're going to do with it. But they bought it because they're going to try and do something with it to try and generate, again, more audience, more interaction, and ultimately, more betting.
And another interesting thing going on in the U.S. market is now college athletes are able to take on sponsorships, and supposedly there's going to be a huge boom in terms of just more influencer marketing in that space from athletes. I'm seeing trends, like I had the guy who runs Blue Wire Pods on here, where he's working with athletes to launch their own podcast, and obviously with like Players Tribune and some others, like athletes and former athletes are getting more into the media space. Does that excite you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest shift I think we've seen in like consumer behavior over the last 10 years in the sports industry is this shift to people following people. So the example you hear a lot is LeBron James has more followers on his social accounts than all of the leagues combined, and all the teams basically. Like him in himself is an absolute juggernaut of a media business and a media person. And you're seeing this sort of cascade through the entire industry. So another example of this we saw was Cristiano Ronaldo, arguably the world's best player. He shifted teams to another league, and that team saw more than 1 million new followers the next day following him shifting over to that team. And the team he left lost 1 million followers. Like, they literally shut down and moved clubs to follow that club just because he was there. So there's this whole relationship, the power of the athlete and the power of the person. Again, in the same way you're seeing in the media space, I suppose, with how the Substack sort of movement has played a role, where people are now following specific journalists and editors that they want to follow. In the sports space, it's the same. People are following athletes they want to be, they like to watch, they want to, that they aspire to follow and to be like, and that's giving them huge power to attract all sorts of opportunity, and not just audiences, but then now revenue from brands and other partners, where some of the biggest athletes in the world are generating tens of millions every year from sponsorship deals because of the audience they've built through their social channels.
And it also lengthens their career, right? Because before, only like a tiny percentage of pro athletes could get a job at like ESPN or something like that. But now, they're probably every athlete that has had a brief time in the spotlight has able now to leverage that a little bit to try to grow their following so that when they do age out or whatever or get injured, then there's something there to build from that they can continue as a media personality now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we're seeing a lot now is that the athletes are using their brand and their audience to use as a tool to basically secure investment or secure equity and investment into sports tech businesses and startups. And so they're not even necessarily needing to put a lot of money down. Sometimes they do put money down in those deals, but basically they're using their brand and their platforms to go, hey, we'll use these for you in return for a stake in your business. And that is working so well for the brand that they're working with, because they can instantly just scale audiences and awareness of their product, particularly for consumer-led products. But also gives the athletes a way of, again, leveraging their brand and leveraging these audiences and people that follow them over the years, whether they're current athletes or ex-athletes. And it's really the last 2 years we've seen an incredible influx in this space.
Another interesting trend is the rise of esports. I was reading an article the other day and said that basically the audience size is almost the same as not as regular sports. It's just that it's not as lucrative because most of that audience is through free broadcasting versus the lucrative broadcasting right of traditional sports. Do you think esports is expanding the sports market, or do you think it's just eventually simply cutting into the market share of other sports?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing you hear is, what is the most important and most valuable thing in anyone's life these days? And it's time, right? So how much time do you have to consume all these different and amazing things? Go back 10 to 20 years, at least someone like myself, sport was by far the number one thing that I would consume, whether it's at home or whether it's live or participate in. But now esports as a commodity, as a proposition, and gaming as well, they are absolutely competing with people's time, and that is basically eating into, let's say, the market share that sports has had. So I see esports as really a competitor to sports. Like, they can learn a lot and take a lot from sports in terms of how to attract sponsors and brands to the platforms. But esports is now a pretty mature space, and I actually think that esports doesn't need sports. Sports needs esports more, because esports has that younger generation of fans and audiences. And we've seen a lot of teams and even some leagues and sports properties try to do things in esports. So like Paris Saint-Germain, one of the biggest football clubs in the world, or soccer clubs in the world, and a bunch of other clubs have set up esports teams, not just in, say, FIFA, but also in non-endemic titles, to try and create awareness and connect to those younger generation of fans. But they've got a challenge there. People's attention spans for the traditional form of sports content, they're not succeeding here. Where social media and esports and gaming is really flourishing in that space.
How much have you shifted your own coverage to the business of esports?
Yeah, we've shifted a fair bit, but when we looked at it, we talked about it about 5 years ago, and more recently, a couple of years ago, about whether or not we should make a definitive move into the esports space. And so what we decided to do is for our events and for our media coverage, we do a little bit. I'd say 10% at most would be on esports, but on the bigger stories that maybe have some sort of impact or are worth the sports industry knowing, but we don't cover it from a kind of a day-to-day perspective. And one of the reasons we don't do that is really the esports industry is a completely different industry. There isn't a lot of crossover actually with like the personnel, and as you talked about or intimated before, even the broadcast landscape is largely digital first through platforms like Twitch. They don't work through or go through those traditional broadcasters like sports do. So the relationship there with who's involved in esports is really quite a unique audience in comparison to sports from our point of view. And so that's why we haven't really doubled down into that space. We have thought about launching an esports, basically an esports business, but it would kind of be it'd have to be effectively a version of the SportsPro business to go after the esports space, because there is just too much to cover and too many new voices to reach out to. You sort of would be starting from scratch there.
So at the time that we are recording this, you just mentioned it earlier, the New York Times just announced it's acquiring The Athletic. Athletic has obviously been an interesting company to watch as a media watcher, because it was kind of like a darling in the sense of it really seemed to be doing something innovative in terms of just like removing the local sports section and creating a bundle out of that. It got a lot of accolades because it reached 1 million paying subscribers, but it seems to have been struggling in recent years to be cash flow positive, and was looking for an acquirer. What do you think about that acquisition? Do you think this was a smart move for the New York Times?
Yeah, it's a big number. The 550 million reported cash is a lot of money, given they've got about 1 million subscribers. That's literally $550 a subscriber. That's a pretty big number. But the New York Times has the infrastructure to really, I guess, continue to help The Athletic grow its audience base and do a better job of monetizing and converting people who are interested in the product, and probably helping on churn, because churn was a big issue for The Athletic as well. They have got a great product. It is, in my view, one of the best media products, definitely in the sports market, no question. I'm quite happy to pay for it as a subscriber. But the margins, like they haven't got any other revenue streams in that business. They literally just have a subscription business. This advertising business is non-existent. They started to dabble a little bit in sponsorship of some of their content, but it's very low level. So the opportunity with the business, where they're having 1 million subscribers on their books, is pretty massive, that they can diversify their revenue streams, which they really should be able to. And a business like the New York Times would know how to do that pretty well. So that, I think, is there's an opportunity there for them to tap into that existing audience base and start generating more revenue from it than it's doing currently. And also the cross-sell opportunities, obviously. People that are buying New York Times, they have a ready-made, captivated audience that is spending money, so is showing positive behaviors. They can directly cross-sell those pretty easily into The Athletic, and vice versa. So it's one of those ones where two businesses together, 1 + 1 should equal 3. So the fit's good. The fit's good. They can really help each other out, and New York Times can do a lot to help The Athletic out. The Athletic's got a great brand now as well. But it's a big number to overcome. I think they will do it. They will make it work in a number of years. But I also think that 550 million number is based on an earn-out, so performance over the next few years. I can't imagine they fronted up all that cash up front.
Yeah, people don't consider this, but New York Times probably has the best growth marketing subscription team. One of the top 5 in the world, maybe up there with Netflix, Spotify, and maybe a handful of others. It's just a cut above the rest in terms of figuring out what are the exact mechanisms for converting someone into a paid subscriber. And then obviously, it has its bundles, like some of its fastest growth over the last few years are in the non-news categories like cooking and games and stuff like that. So seems like the 1 million subscribers is probably just the floor in terms of like what the New York Times can do in terms of getting more subscribers. And like you said, it's like the Athletic has started to dip its toes in advertising in terms of having its free podcasts and its newsletters, but the New York Times obviously has a very robust advertising arm as well. There's a lot of different ways where there could be some good synergy there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can really see how the New York Times can help that business out. And to be honest, they needed it. This was the time that The Athletic needed to sell. They had flatlined quite a bit, and for them to up the ante on investment into marketing, up the ante on new revenue stream development was going to take a lot of work and a lot of new people. And they were really going to be starting from point zero with that. So plugging into someone who's already up to speed with that through what they do at the New York Times makes a lot of sense. And they should hit the ground running pretty quickly, I'd imagine.
Okay, Nick, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SportsPro Nick, one word, and you can find me Nick Meacham on LinkedIn as well. And you don't be afraid to reach out.
Okay, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast. So if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.